Hi everyone, Steve Westman here. Welcome to another edition of the Audio Files. Exciting one today. I have Miles Showell from Abbey Road Studios. Had a wonderful conversation with him, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Click on that button. It helps me out a ton. Thank you guys for all of your support. Lots of more exciting guests and interviews to come. So stay tuned and enjoy my interview with Miles Showell from Abbey Road Studios. We'll see you on the other side of the audio file. Hello, everyone. Steve Westman from the Audio Files. Welcome to a special edition. I've got an incredibly special guest, as you can see, from Abbey Road, live from Abbey Road Studios, Miles Showell. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Steve. I'm fine. How are you?
Very good. I guess our time difference is a little bit, a little bit different today. You're 9 a.m. I guess GMT. I'm 1 in the morning PST.
Yeah, well, thank you for staying up so late to talk to me. It's awkward with the West Coast and then the UK time. It's a big gap. So,
Well, we were going back and forth trying to figure out our schedules. We got it, so we're here doing it. So this is fun. I've been excited to do this for a while and meet you. I mean, you and I have been chatting for a while now, so getting to know each other. So happy to see you here, and lots to talk about today. I think I'll front end load this one. I know a lot of my viewers and everyone's talking about the Revolver Super Deluxe edition. I mean, we found out the mono pressing is going to be, the Revolver mono pressing is a AAA pressing. So I guess a lot of people are excited about this. Tell me what your thoughts are. I mean, you cut the album. Tell me what your thoughts are on that on the new Revolver package.
yeah, I only cut the new remix album that Giles has done with Sam. I was scheduled to do all of it, but I came down with COVID in March when that was all booked in. So I wasn't here. I was off for 11 days. I had a pretty bad dose. And so nearly all of the bonus material was done before I got back. At that point, the new remixes are always the last things to come through. They're always, pushing the thing right to the last minute to get the mixes in. Alex Wharton did the bonus content, the outtakes and the demos and things, and Sean was scheduled anyway to cut the mono thing because he did the mono release for the mono box back in 2014. And I had a chat with Sean about this a week or two ago, and he basically recycled his notes from the 2014 mono box. Everything with the Beatles has to be approved by lots and lots of people down the chain, and the version from the mono box is the approved version. So pretty much it followed the same notes, and some of the equipment has changed a bit. He has a newer console than he did then, but he's got the same EQs and the same tape machine. So yeah, Sean did the all analog advanced tape head loop cut for the mono one. I did the remix, which was the new mix that Giles and Sam have done, where they've deconstructed the old 4-track multi-track tape. And Revolver's different to the other albums in that there's not much bounce material. Everything was recorded together onto the tracks. So, for example, on Taxman, you've got the bass, guitar, and vocals on one track of the 4-track tape. So a lot of the other albums that have been remixed up till now, they would have recorded them all separately and then glued them together later on by copying it. That wasn't done for Revolver. That was the way Jeff Emerick wanted to do it back in 1966. So separating those tracks that are all stuck together was always going to be the Achilles heel. And basically, I think Taxman was going to be the test if they couldn't separate those 3 parts, because it's such a key track, the opening song. If they couldn't do it successfully, then they weren't going to do the album. So thankfully, the source separation software is improving all the time. They use Peter Jackson's people this time. What's Wingnut to separate the files. And I've got to say, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here talking to you, I honestly think of all the remixes that they've done of the Beatles older albums, this is the best one. Everything just sounds so natural. It doesn't sound like it's had a lot of work done to it, which is how you want it to be, really. You don't want it to sound heavily processed and overdone.
So you're going to get the naysayers, as we always do, and they're going to say, "Well, Miles, half speed mastering. Why do you half speed master? I mean, do you think it's the best way to cut your records?" I mean, you're going to get people that don't like half speed mastering. You have the ones that do, the ones that don't. So tell our viewers your thoughts on half speed mastering and why the Beatles albums are half speed mastered by yourself or cut by you.
Half speed mastering was a thing I was always into when I was younger. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad had a record shop, so I was always surrounded by music and surrounded by records. One of my very first words I ever spoke was record. Apparently, it's like mum, dad, and Gegor. I said, which was record, in baby talk. And when I was younger, still a school kid, but into hi-fi and stuff, I got a flyer came through into my dad's shop for some of the early mobile Fidelity Sound Labs albums. So I actually thought, well, that's interesting. I wouldn't mind hearing Dark Side of the Moon. So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I didn't have that one, but I had the Abbey Road album.
Yeah.
And I had the Medical Mystery Tour, which is a bit hit and miss because side two's got some of those terrible duophonic, dodgy Capital stereo things on the back. But side one sounds amazing. And I always said to the people I worked with, I'd love to get into half speed. And they just kept saying, oh, it's really complicated. You've got to change lots of things in the amplifiers and it's just difficult. So fast forward about 20 years to about 15 years ago, and I mentioned it to a kind of maverick tech guy at the company I worked at the time, and he said, do you know what, now might be the time to give it a go. So we did a very quick lash up, did a little test, very, very crude technology. It wasn't done properly. It was just to sort of demonstrate the theory, and the test was so good that we instantly decided, yeah, this has got something. So we set about designing custom filters. Now, I'll try and make this as not too technical and as quick as possible. All records have an equalization curve applied to them since the 1950s, the RIAA.
All right. Yeah.
And you add high frequencies and you take the bass off when you cut. The reason why you turn the bass down, you don't take it right off, you just lower the level of the bass. The reason for that is that the bass grooves need a lot of space on the disc. So the louder the bass, the more oscillations, the bigger they are, the more room you need and the less music you can record. So if you lower the level of the bass, you can record more music. Also, records are intrinsically hissy. So if you add high frequencies, you're making it very bright. But then what you then do is you reverse that on playback. So you have your RIAA pickup, your cartridge goes into the phono part of your amplifier. That reverses it. So it puts the bass back up, turns down the top end. So the bass is restored to where it was, and then the high frequencies are reduced, and that brings the noise and the hiss down from the record. Obviously, if you're running at half speed, the frequencies are wrong. So you need custom filters. And Neumann did make a system for their lathes, but it was terrible. Their heart wasn't in half speed. They didn't think it was worth doing. So I sat down with this tech guy and we designed a new circuit, kind of a custom filter. And that was the game changer. It's suddenly it's like, wow, this really is sounding good. So it's a system where you run the source at half the speed it's supposed to be. And if it's an album, I've got the lathe running at 16 2/3, which is half of 30 1/3. And it just takes twice as long. And you've got to think sound waves coming out of your speakers are wavy grooves on the disc. So if you give the machine twice as long to carve that groove, it's going to do a better job of it. And all that difficult to cut high frequency information, if you've got something with 15, 16 kilohertz in the sound of it, like a tambourine or a hi-hat or something, the recording stylus has to vibrate in that disc 15, 16,000 times a second to get it in the groove. And if it didn't do it, you wouldn't hear it on playback. So that gets quite hot and gets stressed, and it takes a lot of energy. If you can reduce that by a factor of 2 by running it at half speed, suddenly the whole system's just having a very easy life. You're not stressing it, using a lot less current, a lot less heat. You're just giving yourself more headroom. So it can almost always sound better. uh, some of the early half-speed things that were done on tape machines that didn't have a great bass response, and you could kind of get away with that at real time, but at half speed, some of the earlier ones didn't have a lot of bass. Because, as it's well known, I do this digitally.
Yeah.
I've got all the bass and the lovely clean high frequencies as well. So I know a lot of people don't like the idea of digital, but it doesn't always have to be bad. There's digital and digital. It's what you do with it. You know, somebody sent me an album to cut for half speed that was from a CD master that's got loads of limiting and compression and just sounds awful. I won't do it. I just say, look, we'll do it real time because I can't bring anything to the party here. But if you've got a good recording and you treat it sensitively and you do it very high resolution and you don't add any artificial limiting, you know, the squashing to make the digital media sound as loud as possible, that's pointless on records. You can't use that for records. So why bash it against the brick wall limiter only to turn it down even more for the cut? It's crazy. You know, you get none of the benefits of loud level and all of the distortion and the mushy drums and the nastiness that limiting brings. So if I'm doing a half speed album and I'm mastering it, I'll do a specific digital vinyl specific transfer with no limiting, keeping it really pure and clean. We've got very, very good word clock here, so that locks down the digital system, so it's running at exactly 96 kilohertz or 88.2 kilohertz or 192, whatever sample rate we're going with. And it just keeps it really clean and pure. You know, I'm definitely I do understand and I get the argument that people have, oh, it's got to be all analog, but all analog and half speed are a bad combination in my experience. So you want to do it digitally if you're going to do half speed.
And I was going to ask you that because I mean, I held this one up before. This is obviously cut by Stan Ricker in, what was that, 1980? This is probably 83, I think, whenever that was.
Yeah, 82, 83.
So, yeah. So how hard would it have been to cut this all analog half speed mastered if it was you doing it back then? I mean, this was with the original master tapes, I assume. So how would that process work?
There's a story about that. I've heard all sorts of rumors that some of that went via digital. I don't know, and we can't ask Stan now, and I'm not sure Stan would even tell us. I mean, he was my hero. He pretty much, when I was getting into playing records at home, you know, I was a school kid and I had those mobile Fidelity albums, and they just sounded amazing. So and I kind of read up about it and I learned what was going on, even though I'm still 15 or something. And so yeah, the thing with tape at half speed, you've got a head with a gap, and the tape goes past this head. Obviously at half speed the gap's the wrong size, you get problems with the tape weaving up and down. You can, so it's much harder. So that's why I tend to use, and I use a different tape machine than most people would use for an all analog cut. I use an Ampex tape machine, which at the moment doesn't do advanced head or analog. Ampex machines never did, but I found the sound of that is so good that it's better, in my opinion, to capture it digitally, cleanly, do a nice transfer, and then cut from the digital. It just works better.
So you would have had the choice. I mean, on any of the Beatles stuff that you've done, to either cut it half speed or real time speed, right? If it was up to you, or was it just they wanted half speed from you, so you did half speed? Like, who makes that decision?
The remixes are all done digitally anyway. They have to be, because obviously it's gone into this computer to be source separated. So there is no option. The source is digital.
Right.
When they were talking about doing Revolver, it was actually my suggestion that they should put the mono album in the box and do it all analog, because that has gone down in history as one of the great mono albums of all time. I mean, Jeff Emmerich was only 20. I don't know how he got it sounding so absolutely incredible. So I suggested, I said, look, it's such a great mono album, you should put it back in the box and do it all analog. That was, I kind of suggested that to the people at Universal who do the Beatles records. I've only ever held an original Beatles master tape in my hands once, and that was when we did the Get Back sessions with, for Let It Be. And I'm here with Glyn. Got Glyn Johns sat next to me, and we're working.
Oh, wow.
and that's the only time I've ever held a tape. You know, I mean, these things are locked away in the vault. They don't come out very often. You know, the multi-tracks come out when they're doing a remix so that they can transfer everything off and do a nice high res transfer. As far as the original, you know, 1960s tapes go, I've never seen them. You know, I did once I was once allowed to peek my head round the door of the vault. You know, it's like a bank vault, literally. It's a huge metal door, key code to get in, different key code to get in the second door. You know, alarms everywhere. You know, it's unbelievably secure, let's say. And even then, you know, the guy said, I shouldn't let you in, but go on, you can have a look. You know, so it was. Yeah, you know, it's quite a funky thing. And as somebody who grew up as a Beatles fan, it was
Yeah.
in the vault, you know. But I was only in there for about 10 seconds, you know, and they wind in the, you know, you see archives and stuff, and you've got people moving wheels to move the big shelves across. You know, that's how it is. You know, there's a lot of tapes. Because the Beatles were so huge and made EMI so much money, they've kind of kept pretty much everything. Everything is, with a couple of minor exceptions, some stuff that was deliberately gotten rid of because decisions were made in the 60s. But nearly all of it is there, you know, and it's far more intact than most artists of that period.
I was going to ask you the shape of those tapes from what you've heard. I mean, are they still pretty good? All the albums?
Well, I don't really know. I would
Yeah.
imagine the original quarter-inch tapes are pretty tired. I would have, you know, would have had a lot of use. I don't know off the top of my head because I've never seen one, never looked at one, but you can only imagine how many times I've had to run them. And it's a myth that it doesn't wear tape out to run it on the machine. Every time you pass it, bits of oxide come off the tape, you know, or the head, they stick to the head and then they go back on somewhere else. So you've got, you know, molecules in the wrong place. Every time you run a tape, you're damaging it. So, and if you're doing all analog cut, you're wearing it out twice as fast because you've got two heads. You've got the first head that reads the tape, which goes to the disc cutting computer for groove spacing. Then it goes on a big loop, and then it gets past the second head. The second head feeds the cut. So it's not something to be taken lightly. You know, none of us here who sort of poo-poo the idea of doing lots of all analog. It's not because we're being boring or lazy or stick in the mud or arrogant. It's just because we don't want to wear these things out. You know, you've got to imagine you only get so many passes on the tape before it really sounds terrible. And we're custodians of this stuff. We don't want it to be destroyed and not available for future generations. You know, you've got to think of an album. I mean, I don't know what it's like, but just like Rumours, for example, how many times has that tape been run? I'm sure management of Fleetwood Mac don't like that tape coming out of the archive too often and being run. You know, they're going to run it from the high res that they've got. So it's really about preservation, you know.
So question then. So I mean, you hear a lot about high res. So what's high res? What are you cutting at? Like, is it a DSD file that you've turned into? Like, when I hear high res that Miles cuts at high res, what resolution is that?
It's usually, well, nearly always PCM. DSD is very good. There's lots of good things about it. It's pretty hard to work with. It doesn't, and you get all sorts of random out of band noise. It's just not great. And your ability to manipulate the audio is far reduced in DSD. So I generally work PCM. It's really dependent upon what the source is. If I'm sent a digital file as a master, let's say, for example, Revolver, that was 96 kilohertz 24-bit. So I kept that native. So I mastered it 96. I ran it through my kit. I captured it at 96 24-bit. Then I hand my files to Giles and he has a listen and he says, oh, can you change this? Can you change that? Or it's all good or whatever it is. And then he hands it on to the people in the band. Literally, the people in the band listen to it. So, you know, Paul listens to it, Ringo listens to it, Olivia and Danny Harrison listen to it, and Yoko and Sean listen to it. And they all have to approve everything before it comes back. So yeah, it's high res. In the case of Revolver, it's 96. If I'm sent a tape to master, I'll probably capture it at 192 kilohertz, 24-bit resolution. and again, with no limiting, keeping it all really clean and pure. So it's really dependent on what the source is. I always work native. If you send me high res, I do it high res. And then if somebody needs a lower resolution version for compact disc master or for streaming or whatever, then we downgrade it later on. I keep it high all the time until the last second, and then we drop. But obviously for vinyl, you want it as high as possible. So there's no sample rate conversion or down conversion before the cut. I will always cut from the high res. Even if it's a real time cut, that I'll still go from the high res, because why compromise it? You want to run the signal through as little kit as possible and keep it as high quality as possible, and that's what I've always been about.
So with I guess that's interesting as well, because I mean, we know the big DSD debate that happened with MoFi. I mean, I just heard you mention that it's a little bit harder to master using DSD. You want to explain a little bit more about DSD versus PSM?
Yeah, PCM. Yeah, sure.
PCM, sorry, of course.
Yeah, that's okay. Effectively, what you can do with let's start again. One of the big problems with half speed is sibilance, vocals with an S. And the human voice is one of the hardest things to play back accurately. I can cut it, not a problem at all, but playing it back is difficult. When you've got a vocal with lots of energy, i.e. lots of treble or high frequencies EQ'd into the vocal, it can get very bright and very sibilant. Now, I have all sorts of limiters that I can use at real time, which will control those S's and make them smoother so that it cuts and you play it back and it doesn't distort on a let's say on a reasonable system. When I do my half speed cuts, I always test everything on a kind of a domestic setup here in the studio. I don't have massively expensive esoteric equipment. It's got to work on kind of good but not crazy hi-fi, and as long as it works on that, then people with much better gear and moving coil cartridges and esoteric turntables, they'll get far more out of it. But for the average person in the street, it has to work. So I need to control the S's for half speed, because all the limiters and everything I've got that I use at real time, they don't work at half speed, because they're looking for 6 or 7 kilohertz of an S taking off. It's not there, is it? Half speed. It's 3 to 3.5 kilohertz. So it's looking in the wrong place. Plus, a lot of those limiters work on acceleration, the sudden speed and fast transients at half speed. They're not there either. So the biggest Achilles heel of half speed records, of the earlier ones, was S's tearing and distorting. So I will actually sit down with some Isotope RX software that I tend to use, and I will actually go through, sit down either in the studio or sometimes at home with my laptop, with good D2A and good headphones, listening through every lyric of every line of every song. And I think that's a bad S, stop, go back, draw it down a little bit. So I'm literally treating just the S. So it's a very slow, laborious process. It can take a long time. But you can't do that with DSD files. It doesn't work. None of the kind of restoration tools are available for DSD. So you'd need to format convert that to PCM and then go back. And the more conversions you do, you're just changing the audio. It's not a good idea. So better just to stick with high res PCM. So that's what I tend to do. And the advantage of doing half speed with the software that I use to control the S's is that on a real-time cut, you get a lot of collateral damage to the other parts of the music. So if you've got a bright guitar or a loud snare hit or tambourines, all sorts of things, they're also going to get hit by the limiter. So you're losing detail. It's taking that off because the limiter can't hear the difference between the bright vocal that it needs to tamper to stop the distortion and a snare or a bright guitar or a tambourine. So all of those things are getting reduced when they don't need to be, when they'll actually play back fine. So in a way, although it's slow and boring for me to kind of go through an album literally with a fine tooth comb and go, right, stop, bad S, take it down, then everything else that would have been damaged or lost some detail is intact. So that's why you'll find that the other things sound cleaner and brighter, because they're not getting hit by the limiter that's in play just to control the S's. It's the worst nightmare when you've got a really bright sound, great sounding recording, and a really sharp vocal that's going to distort, because you have to take off all of that beautiful top end just to get it to cut and play back. Using the system I use, it takes a long time, but it gets better results. So, but you don't have any of those tools for DSD, so that's why it can be a problem.
And
that's
it's surprising. Yeah. And I mean, it's surprising. I mean, Mobile Fidelity has their one steps that are, DSD, and a lot of their catalog over the last few years has been. Some of them do. Do you have any of the one steps, or have you listened to any of the one steps that have come out?
I've done some one steps before they were doing one steps.
Okay.
I've done a thing with an Eleanor McAvoy record we did, and they only made 150, and they just sounded incredible. So yeah, it's obviously the less processes you go through at the pressing plant, the better it's going to sound. But you need a lot of lacquers for that, and it takes a lot of time. Most of the people I work with won't want to spend the kind of money that it costs. So, and also that we only have one factory making lacquers now. And
that's right.
I'm kind of worried about that, and to use up so many just to make a lot of one steps, I'm not sure it's a sound idea personally.
So I think my viewers, I mean, you mentioned there's only one company. I think the other company burnt down. There was an issue with that?
Yeah, I've actually visited that plant about a year before it burnt down. It was in California in a town called Banning, and yeah, it's quite a volatile material, what the lacquers are made of. It's a bit like semi-dry paint, it burns fairly well. And they had a runaway fire, and really all you can do in that situation is just run. The fire brigade turned up, fire department turned up, and they spent 7 hours trying to put the chemical fire out. It's just it's dangerous stuff. So I'm not surprised that they weren't able to save that plant. Once if it goes wrong, then it goes wrong very quickly. Effectively, what you've got is these aluminium discs, and they get coated in this. They go through like a river, a waterfall of lacquer goes onto the disc, and then it goes on a long conveyor belt, basically across a load of toasters, which are applying heat to dry the lacquer onto the aluminium disc. And I guess I can only assume what happened was they had a pipe split or something, and it sprayed some of the chemical liquid onto one of the heating elements that's drying the lacquers, and you would have a very quickly you'd have a runaway fire. So yeah, it's a terrible shame, because we really do need two suppliers for lacquers. It really worries me that we have one supplier now, they've done a great job. They've stepped up production, they've kept us all going. But if they have a small problem and they go off air for 3 or 4 months while they resolve it, we're in trouble. So it would be pertinent if somebody else would get into the lacquer making business. But it's not for me to do that. If I had $1 million, I'd probably set up the plant, but I don't. So yeah, hopefully somebody will come to the party. But yeah, I'm really grateful to it's the MDC company in Japan that stepped up to the plate big time. They've really, they've helped us out and kept the show on the road, because for a while it was looking like that might be the end of records, because yeah, you've got DMM, which is the cutting into a copper direct metal mastering, but a lot of people aren't very impressed with the sound of that, and there's not very many DMM lathes in the world. I can't use that on my lathe's set up for lacquers. It's a whole different system. So it was back in, I think it was 2019 that they had the fire in California, and it was a nervous few weeks while we worked out what was going to happen and how we were going to cope.
Well, that's interesting timing, right? So 2019, the fire, so blows up the place, and then we have COVID March of 2020. Everyone's sent home for almost a year. Everyone decides to go. A lot of people get into records for the first time.
Yep.
Huge demand in records that we've never seen before. And of course, we have only one company that's able to make these lacquers. I mean, I think we know why there was such a backlog for so long, for the number of years, if that's the reason.
Yeah, it is. Well, a lot of people who were still employed or on furlough and were getting money, and who were regular concert goers, who then all the auditoria are closed, so they can't go to gigs. They decided to bolster their record collections. So all the albums that they really wanted to get but hadn't got around to because there's just other things to spend money on. It's like, well, can't go out, can't go to a restaurant, can't go to a concert, so I'm going to buy all these LPs that I've been meaning to get. So the sales of classic catalog albums went through the roof. And that's what's been causing a lot of the backlog. It was already getting difficult and getting tight to find capacity. And that didn't help, but listen, if people are buying records, I'm happy. That's great. I love
It's
it.
good for you.
But
Keeps you in business. That's for sure.
yeah, it does. But it's frustrating when I've literally been speaking with clients and they want to do, oh yeah, I want to do this half-speed album. It's like, well, what plant can you get? And it's like, well, it's this one. I said, well, maybe we should wait for the other one. I said, it's going to be a year, and I've had people wait a year to put their record out because they
Oh,
wanted,
wow.
get it into a great plant, and they just could not get the capacity because the numbers now, the orders are getting huge,
Huge.
yeah, yeah. It's not, I mean, it's never going to be like it was in the 60s and the 70s, but it's big. Then there are some new plants opening. The GZ company have opened a massive one in Nashville. I'm not sure if it's actually up and running, but it's very close if it's not up and running, and that's going to help alleviate, and people are expanding, but there's only so much you can do. We've got a lot of old presses. There's a couple of companies making new record presses. So the next pinch point is going to be disc cutting lathes, because nobody's made a lathe since the 1980s. I think about 84 was the last one that got made, 85 or something. So, and there's nobody alive who knows how to make one. My lathe was made by the Neumann company in Berlin, and all the people that worked at Neumann in the 80s are dead.
Yeah.
So, and they didn't write everything down, and some of the stuff is a bit strange, and the way technically records shouldn't work. When you think about the format, it's ridiculously Stone Age. You've got this funny little groove in a bit of plastic, and you put a diamond in it, and it vibrates, and you amplify it, and that's all you've got. It really is so crude as technology that it shouldn't work, but it works so beautifully, and people who have records, who know about it, you put a record on and you just engage with it in a way that you can't in any other media. It's weird. If I'm at home
Yep.
and I play a record and it finishes, I'll play another one, and pretty often when that one finishes, I'll play a third one. If I'm listening to something from a digital file, Spotify or even a CD or a high res thing, I might play one album, but at the end of that, so turn it off and do something else. It's really strange. I don't know whether it's just the whole kind of ritual of taking it out of the sleeve and carefully putting it down, and gently lowering the arm onto it, and it's all part of the routine. But you just kind of, it sucks you in a way that no other
I
media does, and it.
I feel that too. I mean, it's that tangible feeling to have. Like, I mean, here's a good example here. I mean,
Oh yeah, I know
this
that one.
one. I think this one. This one kills me a bit too, because I got to get off of my chair a bunch of times since it's 45 RPM. So
Yeah,
I mean, it's a little bit more exercise for me, but it sounds great. I mean, I have done comparisons between your cut here and the Mobile Fidelity one. It's pretty much, I think, and even it's pretty even. I mean, I thought this one sounded really smooth, and I was really impressed with how the bass sounded. And I wanted to know from doing this, how did you? Was this the master tape used? Like, what was
yeah,
used?
yeah.
Yeah.
We that out. In fact, that turned up just before Abbey Road shut its doors in the first COVID lockdown for the first time in its history. Even in the World War II, Abbey Road didn't shut. It stayed open the whole time. But yeah, we got the call. It's like, okay, we're closing our doors. No one's coming in. It's just going to be security in the building. And the day before that, the Masters turned up for Brothers in Arms.
Oh,
So
wow.
getting all these phone calls from the management and from the Knopfler's people. Are the tapes safe? I said, yeah, they're safe. We've got security. I know where they're locked in a room, in a cupboard in my room, this room in the studio. Don't worry about it. They'll be fine. So yeah, I had the original compiled digital tape, and in those days, digital tape was basically there were no tape machines that could record the bandwidth that you needed for digital audio. So they used to convert it into a video track, and it went onto U-matic videotape, which
Right.
is a 3/4 inch tape. It's kind of semi-professional broadcast type format. And they had the compile up. I had the original compiled edited tape, with which was put together with Mark and with Neil Dorsman. And that came in, and they were very, oh, you're going to look after it. I said, of course I'm going to look after it. It's this, you know, a legendary album. And not only that, I'm going to do it, you know, and that was recorded to 16-bit 44.1, which was as good as things got in those days. You know, 1980, 84, that was as high as you could go, pretty much. And so I said, look, I'm going to run the tape. I've got a really great sounding machine. And it's the heads on the tape video deck are in good condition, because that's another problem with these old tapes, is that a lot of these digital formats are very obsolete now. Then nobody makes the spare parts for the machines, so we've got to try and recover the audio while they're still working, because it's no good having this tape that still plays if you haven't got a machine that you can recover it from. But luckily here at Abbey Road, we've got a machine with very low hours on the heads, so it works well. There's no errors. Or very few errors induced by the machine. And so I said to them, look, I'll run this tape and I'll capture it purely as it is. So 44.1, 16-bit, and I'll send you a copy of that for your archive. So you don't have to run it again. You've got it now, you know. So that was done, and I've lost my train of thought. So yeah, anyway, but it sounded great. But I put it on. I just thought, this sounds like the 80s. You know, it's the digital multi-track.
Love it.
Solid state logic console and digital stereo. You know, so it had that sound, and I thought, I'm not going to try to smooth it out too much. I'm just going to present it as it is. So very, very little EQ was applied to that, really. I just thought, it is what it is. It's a classic of its time. So yeah, sorry, you've got to get out of your chair more often to change the disc, but you know,
I love it.
45 RPM and half speed is about as good as you can get, really.
I remember getting the CD when it first came out. I think it was 84, maybe. Do you remember? It was like it coincided with when Pioneer introduced the CD player. So they gave away a free Brothers in Arms CD with every Pioneer player. So this actual album became the first CD that sold 1 million copies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I can believe that. Yeah. Certainly, I remember in the UK, they did some market research, and they found that 35% of, in it, like 85, 86, 35% of CD player owners had Brothers in Arms. So it's a massive penetration for it was the album of the time. But you know, CD is, let's say, very much in trouble at the moment. So I've actually had people talking to me about the CD revival. It's on the way back. So who knows? You know? It is a CD.
This is an SACD Analog Productions. So this Elvis's back sounds. It's fantastic. This was mastered by George Marino when he was, you know, years ago at Sterling Sound.
A legend. Yeah. Oh,
great,
amazing.
Great. This is a great sounding SACD. Great sounding SACD. I love it.
And are you playing the SACD layer or the CD layer? Just
the SACD layer.
Yeah. No, SACD good. They can sound fantastic.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's the thing too. I mean, going back to Mobile Fidelity, we found out this whole DSD thing. Now they DSD 256 for their vinyl, but then they have to, for their SACD, they have to basically downsample it again. So it's not 256, right, for SACD. So that is, I mean, you hear these arguments, oh, the SACD doesn't sound as good as the vinyl, and it doesn't. I think and we're going back to it, the vinyl has that warmth to it, that real true analog feeling to it. So I just love the sound of records. I mean, if it's DSD or analog or whatever it might be, I think just having it as a record sounds better most times.
Yeah, well, there's something magic that happens when you go from electrical, i.e. a tape or a digital file, to mechanical, and then back to electrical, because effectively you make a mechanical recording, which is the groove, and then gets pressed into some vinyl, and then somebody at home plays it with their pickup, which converts it into electrical again. And a bit of magic happens in that process. And you know, if I knew what it was I'd make a plug-in and sell it. But yes, there's just something lovely when everything happens right. When you get a great recording that's been cut well and mastered well and processed and pressed well at the factory, and you've got a good pickup and a good arm and turntable. There's a lot of ifs in all of that, but if all of those things come together, records can sound absolutely astounding. And if you are in a band and you want your people to hear your music in 100 years from now, the safest method is to put it on a record, because we've got 100-year-old records. They work.
So one of my favorite sounding albums that you've cut of all time. You ready for this?
Go on. Ah, yeah. What a record.
Oh, I have the original as well.
Yeah.
And the original was I think it was cut by Ludwig, I believe. Yeah. Did you? And I was going to ask you that. Do you go and listen to the original albums after or before you basically do the job? I mean, do you have a source so you know what it sounds like? Yeah.
If I've got my own record, then I'll bring that in. But obviously, I don't have everything I work on. If the record company have some archive pressings, I'll request them. Sometimes they will turn up, sometimes not. Very often they don't have anything. So, and they're not going to pay for me to go to Discogs and try to source an original copy, So as much as I'd love to do that, it doesn't always happen. So what you can request is what's called the production master, and that would have been the tape made at the time of the original mastering session. So that would contain all the EQ and compression that was applied by Bob Ludwig or whoever did the session, and you then record that to another tape machine. And the idea was you then run the production tape over and over and over again and preserve the master. So
interesting.
We were all about preserving masters even then. So you can request the original production master, and that gives you a clue as to what was done. But sometimes things were done which to compromise the audio in order to make it playable. I know albums that, with the whole brightness thing with the bright vocals, where they were made really, really dull and dead sounding just to keep the vocals from distorting. So why would you want to recreate that, when you can nowadays, you can do so much more by, especially digitally, the ability to micromanage the audio, like I was saying earlier, to control the echoes. If you have a mic pop, when somebody gets too close to the mic and it pops, very easy to get rid of now. Really difficult to get rid of even 10 years ago. So there's lots of things you can do to improve things. So it's always good to reference an old version, but very often you don't. I don't think we should be here to recreate what's already been done. I think you need to do it differently. And sometimes, if I can't better what was done before, well then I'll emulate that. But it's really, I think that it's difficult to say really, but sometimes there's lots of processing is applied for the sake of it, and I've never been about that. I'm always of the opinion that the more bits of kit that I connect together to run the music through, the worse it sounds. You've got a trade-off between, if I put this equalizer in the signal path, it's going to smear the audio to an extent. Is the benefit I get from having it in circuit and having it applying some EQ worth that sacrifice? So as often as possible, I'm using as little equipment as I can. Obviously some recordings they're dreadful and you just need to throw everything you've got to try and lift something out. Other stuff, it comes in sounding incredible. So the best thing you can do is just leave it alone and just present the thing as it is.
So with this one here, with Avalon, I know we've talked about the hype sticker. This hype sticker thing bugs me because, it says here, remastered and cut half speed from the original 1/4-inch tapes at Abbey Road Studios. Explain what that means.
Well, that's a question for the record label. I don't put the hype stickers, and it's, I don't choose the work I do. The work chooses me. So yeah. I could be doing opera one day, Avalon the next day, the Beatles the day after. It's not, so yeah, I'm not a great fan of that wording. I've always been very open about how I work. I'm never tried to kind of use smoke and mirrors. if I do a half speed cut, I do it digitally. If somebody wants me to do an all analog cut, I will do that. But I don't do it in this room. I actually run upstairs to Sean's room and do it that way. So yeah, I don't think that's particularly clear wording, and I think you'll find that since what's happened in the last couple of months, people are being a bit more open now, which is how I've always have been. You know, if people ask me, how did you cut this record? I will always say, but once I've done my bit and I send off the master discs to the pressing plant, it's out of my hands. You know, I don't control the artwork. I don't control the hype stickers. I try to find out what's going on, because if it's got my name on it, I'd like to know what's being said. But really, it's totally out of control. And I don't think it's anybody trying to hoodwink the public in the case of Avalon. I think it's just people who just didn't know any better. You know,
Right.
these people make mistakes, and that happens. But there seems to be, from the people I'm speaking to, you know, nobody's trying to hoodwink anybody really, especially with my clients. You know, we're all open and fair. And I actually had a session for a major label, I won't say who. They wanted me to cut it half speed. We're going to ship you the tapes, which is a rare thing, you know, from America to London. And I said, are you quite sure you know what I'm going to do? Yeah. We want you to cut it half speed from the tape. I said, yeah, I'm not going to cut it from the tape. And I sent all these emails, and eventually the tapes turned up. And I said, one more email. I thought, I'll just try and tell them one more time. So look, I'm going to digitize this before I cut it. If you want it real analog, I can do that too, but it won't be half speed. If you want it half speed from the tape, not going to happen with me. And they said, oh, we thought you were going to do it. I said, no, I've been trying to tell you. So, oh, can you send them back then? So in the end, the job didn't get done.
Oh,
so,
wow.
you know, I'd rather be open and not do the job than try and hoodwink people, and then it will come out with a hype sticker that was a lie. And I don't want to be involved in that, really. It's just, you know, I've always been very open and straight about how I do it. I just think it's the best policy, you know. You, as we've seen, you can end up in a bit of hot water if you try to say stuff that's implies one thing and is another. You know, I mean, I have no, it'll come as no surprise to you that I have no problem with mobile fidelity cutting from digital, because that's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
And digital, if handled right, sounds good. You know, lots of people were talking about Abraxas Santana. Oh, I used to think it sounded lovely. It's like, it still sounds lovely. You know, if it sounded lovely 3 months ago, it still sounds great now.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You know, digital got a bad name in the 90s and the noughties because people were cutting albums from CD masters.
CDs, right.
Were very good, that were, you know, compressed and squashed and horrible. That's a bad source for any record, real time or half speed. Totally understand that. But there's digital and then there's digital. If you handle it well and if you treat it carefully and you don't do all the crazy stuff that people got in that loudness war, you know, you don't need that for records. Already, digital audio recorded to peak level, to 0, without any extra limiting, is too loud to cut. I've got to turn that down to get it on a disc. It's too hot. So why compress it and squash it even more to turn it down even further? It's pointless. So that's why I don't do that. So digital can sound amazing. I mean, I've had a lot of love on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else for Avalon. People just love that, you know.
Yeah.
And the same with the Police. 2 or 3 years ago, I did the box set of the Police. So there you go. Yeah, everyone loves those. So
love it.
Yeah, so it can be good. And in fact, they actually offered to send me the tapes for the Police, and I turned that down because it's recorded on Ampex tape, and that's another problem we're having with analog. Is some of this old tape, you need to bake it in order to make it run. Something changed in the formulation of the tape with Ampex in the late 1970s, and the tape becomes unstable after about 20 years. And the only way you can actually run it is to put it in a special oven, bake it for 2.5, 3 days, and then it will work for about 2 weeks. Downside of baking a tape is it damages the high frequencies. So each time you bake it, you're basically losing air and space in the recording that you can't get back with EQ. You can make it sound a bit nicer, but you can't actually put back what you've lost. Even worse than that, after about 7 bakes, the tape becomes completely unstable and falls apart, and is then no longer runnable. You can't play it, it's gone. And I've actually had in the past from other record companies major albums from major artists that don't play anymore. And I was aware that those police tapes had been baked a few times already, and I just thought, I don't want to be the person that killed Roxanne. So they'd already made some very high resolution transfers. Universal in the UK at least have a whole archiving facility where they're all day, every day, they're doing high res transfers, and they're experts at it. It's all managed by Abbey Road, but it's off-site. And there's a dedicated team of archivists trying to capture all this stuff before the tape falls to pieces. Because eventually, in another 20 years, even if it hasn't been baked to death, that tape won't play anymore. It will just stuck itself together and be useless. So that's another problem with all analog, is that a lot of this stuff is from the 80s, from the late 70s, and it's actually getting very difficult to make it play. You know, it's the holy grail when you get a roll of tape from the 80s and it's on AGFA, because AGFA works. AGFA's stable. But Ampex, which sounded fantastic at the time, I mean, really, it was the sound of rock and roll. And I've used, you know, I used to work in the 80s, so I've used thousands of reels of Ampex tape, loved it when it was new, but you stick it on a shelf for 20, 25 years and it's a problem.
So that's surprising then. Do you think, I mean, 2014, we had the mono box that was cut all analog by Sean and Steve Berkowitz. Was it Steve Berkowitz? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think this will happen again, or do you think they're just going to save the tapes? I mean, they obviously used the master for the Revolver. Yeah. So, I mean, do you think they're going to go back to the vault again and do another mono box?
Well, that would be fun. I would imagine if they did, it would be a long time coming because the orders would be huge. You know, and you've got how many albums, and then 9 albums or something. You know, it's a lot of records to get pressed. And if they did it, they would want to do it really well. So, like the mono box, they'd press it at Optimal, or somewhere like QRP, somewhere that's really known for high quality. Are they going to do it? That's a question for Apple. I don't know. Literally, I knew about Revolver about 3 weeks before I got sent the files, you know, and that's when I said, you need to put the mono album in the box, because, you know, so I have no idea, and I don't even ask, because I don't want to look like I'm angling for the work. You know, as a fan, I really want to work on a Beatles record. You know, when they first asked me to do something, which was the Number Ones album, when that got remixed in 2015, it's like, you want me to do the Beatles? Yeah, you know, I was really up for it. But I don't want to look like I'm presumptuous. I'm going to get it. You know, it's up to Giles and Sam, and it's up to Apple, and up to the Beatles. If the Beatles want to do it, it'll happen, basically. Right. And they're still very hands-on, all of them. They all want to know what's going on and what's happening. So I'm not saying it will never happen. I'm not saying it's likely, but it might do. It might do. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, we're going to get through the Revolver Remix Super Deluxe on October 28th. I have my pre-order in, so I'm excited about that. I'm assuming you have yours, or you possibly get a promo copy or a promo box.
I'd like maybe to send me a copy. I won't get a promo copy. I've heard the test pressings.
Yeah.
So I've of the bit that I've done. I'd like to think they'll send me a copy. But they normally do. To see. But yeah, I think this is the best one they've done. You know, it just sounds really lovely.
So then after that, I mean, obviously Rubber Soul's another one that I always found, you know, is a 4-track as well. There's probably not a lot of bounce back tape either on the Rubber Soul master.
I don't know. I mean, that's a great album. Well, they were recorded very close together. I mean, I think George Harrison referred to Rubber Soul and Revolver as both sides of the same coin. You know, the development from Beatles for Sale to Rubber Soul to Revolver, unbelievable. You know,
unbelievable.
If you think about Revolver, for example, 1966, it's 3.5 years after they recorded Love Me Do. You know, and you think how crude and simple that is, what they managed to achieve in the development in their ideas, and also the engineering ideas. I mean, you know, Jeff Emmerich's coming up with all these crazy ideas. how to get those cello sounds on Eleanor Rigby, for example, and the Leslie cabinet for Tomorrow Never Knows for John Lennon's voice at the end when it's going round in the Leslie
Hmm.
cabinet. So it's, you know, the whole kind of, they were all spurring each other on. So
And that
yeah.
and that happened right around where you are right now, right? You're what studio? Where are you right now relative to where the Beatles
Right.
would have recorded that?
If you see pictures of Abbey Road from the street, it's a big house from the street. What happened was in 1931, the Gramophone Company, as they were called then, which became EMI, they bought that house, and the house had a gargantuan garden, a huge garden. And they, okay, you can buy this house and put a recording studio in the garden. And that's what they did. So this is the first ever purpose-built studio. Before this was built, they would record stuff all sorts of places, but it was in a hall, or it wasn't built from the ground up to be a studio. This is it. So I'm actually one of the few studios that's in the house. So if you look at the building from the street, top right hand side, top corner, that's the room I'm in. The rest of mastering and nearly all the studios are in the extension that was built in the old garden. So I'm Studio 2. It's probably a 30-second walk from where I am now. So that's very, the live area on the floor is very, you know, if you see pictures of the Beatles recording, you walk in there, you'll recognize it instantly. You know, it's barely changed. I don't think they even painted the walls until about 1982. So it's very, very familiar because that room just works. It's a great sounding room. So yes, it's great fun to be in this building where all that legendary stuff was made. But yeah, so I'm in the house. I love it here. It's a great room. Because the house was built in the 1820s, very high ceilings, so I've got lots of space. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's an honor. You have to kind of remind yourself when you walk in the door. It's like, hang on a minute, there's queues of people trying to cross the crossing, queues of people going to the shop next door and looking through the gate, and I just march straight past them and come in. You know, it's like you've got to remember that it's an honor, you know, to be here. So you know, it's easy to get kind of blasé towards it, or get not arrogant, what's the word, just get used to it, you know, it becomes normal. And it's like, no, this is a privilege. So it's a good place, and they're really good people here. You know, the technical staff are fantastic, always have been. The whole Abbey Road machine is very well run. You know, my boss Lucy, who runs the mastering, she's really organized, you know, really on top of it. Everything works here. You know, we've got 9 full-time technical people. I've never worked in a building before where literally everything in the desk works the way it should. Normally something's not quite right and you have to make do with it. Here, it's like anything goes wrong, you ring up a tech and they run upstairs, and they can't fix it on the spot. They'll take it away and drop something else in its place, and then come back in a day or so and say, okay, I've repaired it, it's yours. You know, really, really well drilled building, this place. I mean, when I first came here back in 2013, and they showed me the room that I'm in now, this room 30, this is called. Every room has a number in this building, even the toilets have numbers. And they said, oh yeah, we're going to put you in room 30. And I walked in, and although it was just a shell, they'd used it for offices, and then for a while for classical editing and stuff, and it wasn't treated, but you could just, you know, when you're buying a house and it feels right, this room felt. It just walked in, I said, yeah, this is going to work, you just know. And this was about April. They said, okay, we'll get you in here by the 2nd week of July. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's a bit precise. 2nd week of July came, okay, we're ready. You know, they just know how it's going to go, and they're just really, really on it here, and very, very welcoming. I came here from another facility, and they could easily have been quite sort of, you know, oh, well, we're Abbey Road, and nose in the air. Not at all. They couldn't have been more friendly and more welcoming. And everybody here kind of collaborates. We try and do the best thing we can with each other to help the client. You know, so if somebody else needs a hand with something, they'll call me in, or I'll call them in, or whatever. We just, you know, we're all trying to do the best we can.
So I have a question for you, because obviously you've been cutting records for a long time. What is your best sounding favorite non-Miles Showell record?
Oh, the record that I think, good grief. Well, I've got a couple of Stan Ricker's albums actually.
Which
Uh,
ones? Which ones?
not Half Speed.
Okay.
I've got the 1812 that he did. I don't know if you've seen that. Very difficult to track and play. And they put it was recorded digitally on a very early digital system in the 70s called the Sound Stream.
Hmm.
And that actually was 16-bit, but 50 kilohertz. So it's good. And actually early digital was really nice sounding. 3M digital and Soundstream was good. And there was a sticker on the thing saying warning digital cannons, because the cannons are just like really very deep, very loud, and the groove has a right angle bend in it. And most people's pickups jump on that, but if you can get it to play, it's kind of pretty breathtaking. And there's another record he did, and I'm trying to remember the artist, but it was a live director disc of a pipe organ, something Fox. Oh God, what? It was his favorite recording that he ever did, actually.
Oh wow.
Because I had when I started doing Half Speed, I got in touch with Stan, because he was still alive then and he was doing his own cutting, and I just sent him an email just saying, look, I'm a big fan of your work and I'm trying to get into this and I've always wanted to do it, and do you have any tips? And he came back. It took him a while to he said, what are you doing this Half Speed? And everything he always wrote was always capital locks, cap lock all the whole time. But once you kind of get used to that, that was just Stan's way. He was really helpful. Once he realized that I was into doing Half Speed and I was prepared to sit through it, he sent me all sorts of tips and all sorts of ideas, which were really, really, really helpful. So I'm grateful to him. So yeah, I'm gonna have to let you know the name of that album.
Yeah, sure.
But they had to record it. It was recorded in San Francisco. They took the lathe and the desk into a church and they recorded it overnight when there was no traffic noise and everything. But somebody heard the organ being played at 3 o'clock in the morning and called the police out. So one of the cuts got ruined because there's all sirens when the police
Oh
turned.
wow.
So but yeah, he was really proud of that album. So I looked
definitely
out.
definitely drop me a text and let me know which one that was. I'd be very curious to know.
It'll probably come to me the minute we end this call.
Oh, of course, always. Okay, then your favorite album that you've cut, best sounding album that you've cut.
Oh dear, that sounds like I'm gonna have a big ego.
No, it's about being proud of your work. It's not being egotistical.
Okay. Yeah. Well, is this? Yeah, you got me on the spot there, really. I guess probably Sergeant Pepper, but that's really because it's a very personal album to me. It was the first album I ever owned. When I was a kid, we lived in the country, middle of nowhere, basically, and anywhere we went even the supermarket was a 20-minute drive. So both of my parents had cars. They both had 8-track cartridge players. So you'd hear an album to and from the wherever you were going. You'd hear half of it going there and half of it coming back, always, if not more. And both my parents had Sergeant Pepper on an 8-track in the car. And when I was a kid, my dad had a record shop, and he never used to give me albums. He only ever gave me singles. But he said, I had chicken pox and it was a really bad case. And he said, you've been really brave. Well done. So as a special treat, I'm going to let you have an album, which was kind of like, whoa, an album. And immediately I knew what I wanted. I said, yeah, I'll have Sergeant Pepper. And he said, well, what do you want that for? You can hear it whenever you want, in the car. And I said, yeah, I know I can, but I can't hear it in the house. And he said, yeah, fair enough, because we only had record players in the house. Didn't have any kind of tape player other than little portable cassette, rubbish, little mono thing, no good. So he brought me home a copy of Sergeant Pepper. I still have that. My first copy would have been when the album was about 6 years old. Later on, I actually managed to get the Holy Grail of Sergeant Pepper's. I got the Nimbus pressing.
Yeah, the Nimbus. Yeah.
I bought one because I was, a school kid, hi-fi nerd. Saw it advertised in the magazine that sold it. I bought one. just so, but by chance I have one of those, and that's really good. In fact, when we were doing when Giles and Sam were working on that, I gave them a dub from the disc. Said,
Mm.
look, this has gone down in history as the best ever version. You got to beat this. So yeah, I was just I was kind of kicking myself, and I was just so chuffed to be actually on an album that I've listened to for nearly 50 years. So yeah, that's one of the ones I'm most proud of. Yeah, what's my favorite sounding? I don't know. I really don't know, you know.
You can say all of them.
Yeah, there's lots. I mean, some of the
Yeah.
Eurythmic stuff was good. You know, we had real problems getting those tapes to play. So, you know, and finding Sweet Dreams are made of this, and getting the original tape for that, which hadn't nobody couldn't even find it for a long time. So that was cool to work on. I tend not to get, when I'm at home, I try to approach music from a music lover's point of view rather than a technical point of view. I'm trying really hard not to focus on the technical situation. You know, I have a very nice turntable. I've got lovely gear, obviously, but I'm listening to it as a music fan, not trying to analyze what was done or what wasn't done. Because otherwise,
So
it's
you
like
see behind my left shoulder, you have that copy. I think you and I discussed the Kind of Blue, the Analog Productions
I
version.
have, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, that was done from the 3-track tape,
Yeah, I
which
have I have both the 33 and the 45.
do you? I've not got the 45. Is the 45 a lot better? Do I need to get it?
There's a little bit. It's obviously, it has a little bit more space on it. It
Yeah.
gives a little bit more dynamic. But I mean, if you've got the 33, you don't have to exercise as much. I think you're fine with the 33.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's my namesake. I'm named after him.
I know
So
you are. Yeah,
yeah.
Miles,
Yeah.
one of my favorite. And then I have, this is another half speed. You remember? I don't know if you know about these guys. This is the A&M audiophile pressings, Canadian version. So they came up with a whole A&M version audiophile for the Canadian market. And this
Right.
this one's very interesting. This is Supertramp's Even in the Quietest Moments. Now, what
What a
makes this one, it's fantastic. Fool's Overture, love it.
yeah.
This was basically a Canadian Mobile Fidelity album, and it wasn't cut by Mobile Fidelity. It was cut by Stan Ricker at half speed, and it was actually pressed on JVC Super Vinyl in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, that's basically that Super Vinyl was incredible. They made
Yeah.
that because for the quadraphonic, they needed really hard vinyl. For the quadraphonic had a 30 kilohertz carrier, high frequency tone to tell the amplifier what to do. And they were finding with regular kind of American vinyl, you play it about 5 times and it would wear away. The 30 kilohertz tone would wear. Whereas so JVC invented this super hard glass hard vinyl, and apparently even after 200 plays, it was only down about 3 decibels. So you know, it's very long lasting, that hard vinyl. So yeah, that was great. I just wish JVC was still making records, and you know, somebody knew what that vinyl formulation was, because we'd love to get hold of that now. You know, that would be amazing.
No kidding. That would be amazing.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Well, I'm going to wrap it from here because I know, time is money, and I really appreciate you sitting with me for this time to discuss everything. I would love to have you on again, maybe after the Revolver drop at some time, and later on this year, we can sort of do a full Revolver sort of review. If you'd like to do that, that'd be incredible.
I can be involved with that if you need it. No problem.
I would love to be. It'd be incredible.
Yeah.
I'm excited for that. It's only a month away now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good stuff. It's a great. I mean, it is. I've heard it a lot, so I won't be listening for a while. And it was one of my absolute faves. Pepper is up there for me just because I grew up with that.
Yeah.
But really minuscule amount behind it would be Revolver and Abbey Road are probably they're the top 3 for me.
And that's for me too. For me, I mean, I don't tell people this often, but Revolver #1 for me, because it was my very first Beatles album. I actually went and bought with my own money when I was 13. It was a mono Canadian version. I still have it, of course.
Okay.
And then #2, what's that?
Was that the early 80s cut?
No, it was. This is the mono. This is the original mono from '66 Canadian version from '66. Wow. I have it. I was 13 years old at the time. So in 1986, I went out. It was like minus 30 where I lived in Winnipeg, and went out with my money and picked up a Revolver. I still have that today.
Yeah.
I have an original Canadian version of Abbey Road as well, which sounds fantastic. And
Yeah.
then my third, same as you, we have the same taste, Sergeant Pepper as well, and I have an original Sergeant Pepper Canadian version.
Yeah. Well, that Abbey Road album was, you know, effectively, although it wasn't the last album released, it was the last one they made,
Yeah.
and I think they probably knew it was coming to an end, but they went out on a big high. I mean, what a record! That, especially side two, it's just
Oh,
like it's relentlessly smashing you over the head with
yeah.
fantastic material.
Oh.
It's just incredible. When
What?
it can't get any more. Well, hey, when it can't
Got the
get,
box.
you know, when you think you've reached the top, and then the Ringo's drum solo comes in, and for the end, it's just, you know. Yeah,
And that's his only drum solo he ever did as a Beatle.
yeah, I know. What a shame he didn't do more. Yeah, it was a great ending. You know, I mean, I know Let It Be came out later, but they definitely went out on a high. So, and that the picture, I can see that you got the picture disc on the wall behind you there. So, yeah, we have people queuing up the street here, just round the corner, to recreate that shot. People whose parents weren't born when the Beatles were in here making music, doing, you know.
Are they bringing the ladder? Because I mean, they had to.
Yeah, no,
He had to go on. He had to go on the ladder for that.
yes,
Right? So,
yeah, they had a policeman stopping the traffic, apparently.
Yeah.
No, not seen anybody with a ladder. You get some really cavalier tourists trying to, you know, stand in the middle of the road, and it's a busy road. I wouldn't stand in the middle of the road. No way, you know. But
so you clearly haven't walked across without shoes on like Paul then.
no, but I've seen people do that.
Of course they have.
Especially in summer, not so much now. It's getting, but summer you get people with flip flops. They'll kick them off, and they'll walk off there. Yeah, so that's still happening, and that crossing, there's literally dozens of people all day, every day, queuing up to go across that and do their shot.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's incredible, really, and that all just happened. It was Paul's idea. Well, you know, the album was going to be called Everest because Jeff Emmerich smoked Everest cigarettes, and they thought, yeah, let's call it Everest. That's great, you know, and we're going to fly to K2, you know, go to Nepal, get helicoptered to the top of, you know, K2, and get photographed on that. And they just said, that's going to take us 3 days of jet flying. No, you know, to get there and get back. So let's just go outside and do a shot. And it was just done at a spur of the moment thing, you know, literally. And, you know, it's quite a good metaphor too, because it was the last album and they're pretty clearly marching out of the building. You know, you look at how they're doing it, but it's become an iconic shot. Even people who aren't even interested in the Beatles will come and get their picture taken on that crossing just because it's a thing to do. You know, if you're in London, that's what you do. So actually quite a dangerous place to cross the street. I don't tend to use it because the people who live here, you know, driving around don't really want to stop because they have to stop all the time. So they'll try and just kind of go, you know, and let's go through. I would tend to take my chances crossing elsewhere rather than on that crossing. So, but you know, it's become an iconic thing, and we're still here. You know, I'm in this building because those four guys did a lot.
Amazing.
55, 60 years ago. You know, so
amazing.
So I'm grateful to them, not just for their music, but the fact that I'm here. You know.
Well, I'm grateful to you. Thank you so much for your time. I'm really, truly honored to have you on my channel. I really am.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful for you for staying up till 2:25 in the morning.
So, I didn't realize the time. I just looked over. I'm like, holy crap! It's 2:25 a.m. So
you better get to bed.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna put this one on. You'll see it in the next, I don't know, 4 to 5 hours, so people get to listen to what we got to listen to first here. So I'm excited about that.
Great. Well, thanks for speaking with me, and
thank you.
Keep playing those records.
You too.
Cheers. See you, Steve.
See you later.